Blood trickled down Eleanor Vaughn's pale face as she lay motionless on the dusty road leading into Willow Creek, Wyoming. The year was 1875, and the promise of a new life had led her 2,000 miles from Boston only to end here abandoned, robbed, and left for dead just 3 miles from her destination. Wade Harrington pulled his horse to a stop when he spotted what appeared to be a bundle of fabric on the road ahead. As he drew closer, the unmistakable form of a woman became clear, her blue traveling dress stained crimson, her blonde hair matted with blood. A satchel lay torn open beside her, its contents scattered by the wind. "Good Lord," he muttered, dismounting in a swift motion. Dust kicked up around his worn leather boots as he approached and knelt beside her. His calloused fingers pressed gently against her neck, finding a faint but steady pulse. The woman's eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of a summer sky. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't you worry, miss." "I've got you," Wade said, carefully sliding his arms beneath her shoulders and knees. He lifted her against his chest, surprised by how light she felt despite the layers of her traveling clothes. "What happened to you?" "Ambushed," she managed to say before her eyes rolled back and she went limp in his arms. Wade wasted no time. He secured her to his horse before mounting behind her, one arm holding her steady against his chest as he urged his stallion toward town. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder, her breathing shallow but persistent. "Stay with me," he whispered, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Willow Creek's just over that ridge. Doc Miller will patch you up right quick." The afternoon sun beat down on them as Wade's horse galloped toward town. Willow Creek was small but growing a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above them at the far end. People stopped to stare as Wade thundered down the dirt road, the unconscious woman clutched against him. He pulled up hard in front of the doctor's office, a modest clapboard building with a hand-painted sign. "Doc," he called out, dismounting carefully while keeping hold of the woman. "Doc Miller." "Need you now." The door swung open to reveal Edwin Miller, a man in his 50s with spectacles perched on his nose and sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He took one look at the bloodied woman and gestured Wade inside. "Put her on the table," he instructed, already moving to wash his hands. "What happened?" "Found her on the road to town. Looks like she was attacked. Said she was ambushed before she passed out again." Wade laid her gently on the examination table, reluctant to let go. Something about this woman, her delicate features even in distress, the way she had looked at him with those blue eyes stirred a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. "She's lost blood," Dr. Miller observed, examining the wound on her head. "Nasty blow. Whoever did this meant business." "There's bruising on her wrists too. Looks like she fought back." "Will she be all right?" Wade asked, his voice gruff with concern. "Hard to say just yet. Head wounds are tricky business." The doctor began cleaning away the blood with a damp cloth. "You did right bringing her straight here." "Any later?" He didn't finish the sentence. "I need to notify the sheriff," Wade said, though he made no move toward the door. "Might want to check her belongings first, see if we can figure out who she is," Dr. Miller suggested. "She's not from around here." Wade nodded, retrieving the small satchel he'd secured to his horse. Inside, he found a letter, the paper crinkled and spotted with dirt. His eyes widened as he read. "She's Eleanor Vaughn," he said slowly. "She's a mail-order bride. Says here she was supposed to meet a man named Thomas Blackwell today in Willow Creek." "Blackwell?" The doctor looked up sharply. "That's curious. Thomas Blackwell left town 3 days ago, said he was heading to Cheyenne on business." Wade's jaw tightened. "So either he forgot he had a bride coming, or he never intended to meet her at all," the doctor finished grimly. The woman Eleanor stirred on the table, a soft moan escaping her lips. Both men moved closer as her eyes opened once again, confusion and fear evident in her gaze. "Where am I?" she whispered, trying to sit up before wincing in pain. "Easy now," Dr. Miller said, gently pressing her back down. "You're in Willow Creek, Wyoming. This gentleman found you on the road and brought you to my office. I'm Dr. Miller." Eleanor's eyes found Wade's face. "You carried me." Wade removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his dusty appearance. "Wade Harrington, madam, ranch owner just outside town, found you about 3 miles out." "Thank you," she said softly, then frowned. "My things, I gathered what I could find," Wade assured her. "Not much, I'm afraid." "Your bag was torn open." A look of distress crossed her face. "The money, all my savings were in that bag." Wade and the doctor exchanged glances. "I'm sorry, Miss Vaughn," Wade said. "There wasn't any money when I found you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then I have nothing. Nothing at all, doctor." Miller cleared his throat. "Miss Vaughn, we found your letter about Mr. Blackwell." Eleanor's face crumpled. "He wasn't there. The stagecoach driver was supposed to take me all the way to town, but he said there was a problem with a wheel. 2 men offered to escort me the rest of the way while he fixed it. They took everything." Her voice broke. "Hit me when I tried to stop them." Wade's hand tightened into a fist at his side. "The stagecoach driver was in on it," he said quietly. "There's no wheel damage that would stop halfway to town." Eleanor closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "And now Mr. Blackwell isn't even here. He left town 3 days ago," Dr. Miller confirmed gently. "I'm sorry, my dear. I don't understand." "His letters were so kind, so promising." Eleanor's voice was hollow with shock. "He sent for me. I sold everything to come here." Wade felt a surge of anger toward the absent Blackwell and the men who had attacked her. "Miss Vaughn, you rest here and let Doc patch you up. I'm going to talk to Sheriff Patterson about what happened." "What's the use?" Eleanor asked bitterly. "They'll be long gone by now." "Maybe so," Wade admitted, "but folks should know what happened, and Blackwell has some explaining to do when he returns." "If he returns," Dr. Miller muttered. Wade put his hat back on. "I'll be back to check on you, Miss Vaughn. You're safe now." Eleanor's eyes met his, vulnerability and gratitude mingling in her gaze. "Mr. Harrington, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Something in her expression made Wade's heart beat faster. "Just doing what anyone would do, madam." But as he stepped out into the afternoon sun, Wade knew that wasn't entirely true. The woman with the sky-blue eyes had stirred something in him, something he hadn't felt since losing his wife 3 years ago. And the thought of leaving her alone in her current predicament didn't sit right with him at all. Wade found Sheriff Patterson at his office, boots propped on his desk and hat tipped over his eyes in the afternoon lull. "Sheriff," Wade called, causing the older man to startle upright. "Harrington," he acknowledged, straightening his vest. "What brings you to town on a Tuesday?" "Found a woman on the road from Douglas. Been beaten, robbed, and left for dead. Mail-order bride supposed to meet Thomas Blackwell." Sheriff Patterson's bushy eyebrows rose. "Blackwell? He lit out of here days ago, so I hear. This girl sold everything to come here, and now she's at Doc Miller's with nothing but the clothes on her back." The sheriff reached for his hat. "Let's hear what she has to say, then. Might be we can catch these fellas if they're still in the territory." By the time they returned to the doctor's office, Eleanor was sitting up, a bandage wrapped around her head. Dr. Miller had given her a cup of tea, which she clutched like a lifeline between trembling fingers. "Miss Vaughn," Wade said, removing his hat again. "This is Sheriff Patterson." Eleanor nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "Sheriff. Miss Vaughn, I'm mighty sorry about what happened to you. Can you tell me what these men looked like? The ones who attacked you, Eleanor closed her eyes, concentrating. One was tall, thin, had a scar across his chin. The other was shorter, stocky, wore a red bandana. Both had dark hair. The stagecoach driver called them Ned and Clancy. The sheriff's expression darkened. Ned Harper and Clancy Doyle. Been causing trouble up and down the territory. Last I heard they were running with the Carson gang. Will you go after them? Eleanor asked. I'll telegraph the surrounding towns, but they've likely crossed into Montana territory by now. Sheriff Patterson sighed. As for Blackwell, that's curious timing. He's lived here 4 years, keeps to himself mostly, works as a clerk at the Mercantile. Never would have pegged him for the type to send for a bride then vanish. His letters were so sincere, Eleanor said softly. He wrote of building a life together, of his steady employment and modest home. I thought. Her voice faltered. People aren't always what they seem on paper, Wade observed quietly. Dr. Miller cleared his throat. The immediate concern is Miss Vaughn's recovery and accommodations. She can't very well sleep on my examination table. The boarding house has rooms, Sheriff Patterson suggested. I have no money, Eleanor reminded them, color rising in her pale cheeks. Everything I had was in my bag. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Wade shifted his weight, then heard himself say, I have a spare room at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Whitaker, lives in. It would be proper. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him in surprise. That's very kind, Mr. Harrington, Eleanor said hesitantly. But I couldn't impose. It's no imposition, Wade insisted, wondering at his own impulsiveness. You need somewhere to recover, and I've got the space. Once you're well, we can figure out next steps. Dr. Miller nodded approvingly. It's a sensible solution. I'd keep you here, Miss Vaughn, but as you can see, I'm not set up for extended patient stays. It's settled then, Wade said before Eleanor could protest further. Doc, is she well enough to travel the short distance to my ranch? If you take it slow, yes. The wound needs cleaning and fresh bandages daily, and she'll need rest. No exertion for at least a week. Eleanor looked overwhelmed. Mr. Harrington, I don't know how I could ever repay such kindness. Wade met her gaze steadily. No repayment necessary, Miss Vaughn. It's the decent thing to do. An hour later, after Dr. Miller had provided detailed care instructions and medicines, Wade helped Eleanor onto his horse. She was dressed in the same travel-stained blue dress, but Mrs. Miller had loaned her a shawl to ward off the cooling evening air. I'll ride behind you, Wade explained, mounting carefully to avoid jostling her. It's about 4 miles to the ranch. You let me know if you need to stop. Eleanor nodded, her back stiff against his chest as they began the journey. Wade was acutely aware of her warmth, the faint scent of lavender that somehow persisted despite her ordeal, and the way she gradually relaxed against him as fatigue overcame her tension. Tell me about Boston, he said, hoping conversation might keep her alert and distract from her pain. It's different from here, she replied after a moment. Crowded. Buildings so tall they block the sun. I worked as a seamstress in a dress shop after my parents died. The hours were long, the pay meager. Is that why you answered Blackwell's advertisement? She nodded slightly. That and loneliness. My parents were all I had. When the influenza took them last year, there was nothing keeping me there. I'm sorry for your loss, Wade said, meaning it. He knew all too well the hollow feeling of outliving loved ones. What about you, Mr. Harrington? Eleanor asked. Have you always lived in Wyoming territory? Came out here 10 years ago from Missouri. Worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny. Bought my own spread after 5 years. It's not the biggest ranch in the county, but it's mine. You must be proud. Wade considered this. Suppose I am. Built something from nothing, got good grazing land, healthy stock, but a ranch is a lonely place for one man." The words hung between them as they crested a hill, revealing a valley below. In the distance, a two-story farmhouse stood surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and open pasture. "That's it," Wade said. "Rocking H Ranch." Eleanor gazed at the property, taking in the neat fences, the cattle dotting the hillside, smoke curling from the chimney. "It's lovely," she said softly. Something in her tone, appreciation rather than judgment, warmed Wade unexpectedly. "It's home," he replied simply. As they approached, the front door opened and a plump woman in her 60s emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "There you are, Mr. Harrington. I was beginning to wonder." She stopped short, noticing Eleanor. "Oh my, Mrs. Whitaker," Wade called as he brought the horse to a stop. "We have a guest who will be staying with us while she recovers. This is Miss Eleanor Vaughn. She's had a terrible ordeal." Mrs. Whitaker's motherly instincts visibly took over. "You poor dear. Look at that bandage and your dress. Come inside this instant. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven." Wade dismounted first, then reached up to help Eleanor down. Her legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her against him. "I'm sorry," she murmured, embarrassed. "I'm weaker than I thought." Without hesitation, Wade swept her into his arms for the second time that day. "No need to apologize. Doc said you should rest." Mrs. Whitaker was already bustling ahead to open the door. "I'll prepare the guest room right away. Poor lamb looks done in." Wade carried Eleanor across the threshold, her slight weight familiar now in his arms. The house smelled of home cooking and wood smoke, simple comforts he rarely noticed anymore. "This is very kind of you both," Eleanor said as Wade carefully set her down in an armchair by the fireplace. "I promise I won't be a burden for long." "Nonsense," Mrs. Whitaker declared, tucking a quilt around Eleanor's legs. "You stay as long as you need. Any friend of Mr. Harrington's is welcome here." Wade caught Eleanor's eye and saw the flicker of amusement there. They were hardly friends, having met under the most unusual circumstances just hours ago. Yet something about her presence in his home felt strangely right. "Mrs. Whitaker, Miss Vaughn will need the spare bedroom prepared, and perhaps you could find her something clean to wear. I'm sure some of your things might do until we can arrange for proper clothes." Of course. And you'll be wanting supper soon, I expect." "Miss Vaughn, would you prefer to eat here by the fire, or do you think you could manage the table?" Eleanor straightened slightly. "The table, please. I've imposed enough without disrupting your household routines." Wade found himself admiring her dignity despite her circumstances. "It's no imposition," he assured her again. "I'll just see to my horse and then we'll eat." Outside in the gathering dusk, Wade took longer than necessary to unsaddle and brush down his stallion. The day had taken an unexpected turn, and he needed a moment to gather his thoughts. He hadn't brought a woman to his home since his wife died, hadn't even considered the possibility. Yet here he was, installing a beautiful stranger in his guest room with no clear plan beyond helping her recover. "You're a fool, Harrington," he muttered to himself. "A damn fool." But when he returned to the house and saw Eleanor seated at his table, her golden hair catching the lamplight despite the bandage, her blue eyes bright with gratitude as Mrs. Whitaker served the meal, Wade couldn't bring himself to regret his impulsive offer. Somehow, in the span of a single afternoon, everything had changed. And as he took his seat across from her, Wade had the unsettling feeling that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The first few days of Eleanor's stay at the Rocking H passed in a blur of sleep and pain. The blow to her head had left her with persistent headaches and dizziness, confirming Dr. Miller's instructions for complete rest. Mrs. Whitaker proved to be a godsend, bringing broth and tea, changing bandages and providing simple nightgowns and a faded blue dress that, while too large, at least gave Eleanor something clean to wear. Wade kept his distance, aware of the impropriety of their arrangement despite Mrs. Whittaker's presence. He visited Eleanor's room only once daily, standing awkwardly in the doorway to inquire after her health before retreating to his ranch duties. On the fourth morning, Eleanor awoke feeling stronger. The persistent throb in her head had dulled to an occasional twinge, and she found herself restless after so much time abed. She dressed carefully in the borrowed blue dress, pinning and tucking where necessary to make it fit her smaller frame, and ventured downstairs for the first time. The main floor of the Harrington home was simply but comfortably furnished. A large hearth dominated the sitting room, flanked by two well-worn armchairs and a small sofa. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly well stocked for a ranch house. The dining room held a sturdy oak table large enough to seat 8, though only 3 places were ever set. Beyond lay the kitchen where Mrs. Whittaker could be heard humming as she worked. "Mrs. Whittaker," Eleanor called softly, not wanting to startle the woman. The humming stopped and Mrs. Whittaker appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her apron. "Miss Vaughn, you're up and about." Her expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Are you certain you should be on your feet?" "I feel much improved," Eleanor assured her, "and I cannot bear another moment of staring at the ceiling. Please, let me help with something, anything. I'm quite capable with a needle if you have mending." Mrs. Whittaker hesitated, then smiled. "Well, I do have a basket of Mr. Harrington's shirts that need attention. The man is harder on clothing than any child I've ever known. But only if you sit comfortably by the window where the light is good." "That would be perfect," Eleanor agreed, relieved to have a purpose, however small. Soon she was settled in the sitting room, a basket of mending beside her and a cup of tea at her elbow. The domestic task was soothing, familiar, and Eleanor found herself relaxing as her fingers worked the needle through fabric. Through the window, she could see the ranch spread out before her, men moving cattle in the distance, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney, chickens pecking in the yard. And there was Wade, astride a chestnut mare, directing operations with quiet authority. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the respect with which his ranch hands responded to him. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders and straight back a stark contrast to the slender, desk-bound men she had known in Boston. As if sensing her scrutiny, Wade turned toward the house. Eleanor ducked her head quickly, not wanting to be caught staring, but not before their eyes met across the distance. Heat rose in her cheeks as she focused intently on her stitching. A few minutes later, the front door opened, and heavy boots sounded on the wooden floor. "Miss Vaughn," Wade's deep voice greeted her, "it's good to see you up and about." Eleanor looked up, composing her features into what she hoped was a serene expression. "Mr. Harrington, yes, I'm feeling much stronger today. Mrs. Whittaker has kindly allowed me to make myself useful with some mending." Wade removed his hat, running a hand through hair the color of wheat in late summer. "You don't need to earn your keep, Miss Vaughn. You're here to recover. Nevertheless, I prefer to contribute where I can." She held up the shirt she was repairing. "You seem to have a particular talent for splitting seams, Mr. Harrington." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Hazards of ranch work, I'm afraid. So I gather." Eleanor returned his almost smile with one of her own. "Mrs. Whittaker tells me you've had this ranch for 5 years now." Wade nodded, moving to stand by the window. "Built the house first, then added the barn and corrals. Started with 30 head of cattle and 5 horses. Now we're up to 300 cattle and a dozen horses." "Impressive," Eleanor said sincerely. "You've built something remarkable here." Wade's expression softened slightly. It was always the dream, a place of my own, answering to no one but myself and the weather. And yet Mrs. Whittaker mentioned that you were. That is, she said you had. Eleanor stumbled, suddenly unsure how to ask about his past. I was married, Wade supplied, his voice even. Elizabeth died 3 years ago, childbirth fever. I'm so sorry, Eleanor said softly. The baby, Wade's jaw tightened. Stillborn, a son. Eleanor set aside her mending, her heart aching for the pain evident in the lines of his face. That's a terrible loss. I didn't mean to pry. You're not prying. It's natural you'd wonder about the household you've landed in. Wade turned back to the window. Elizabeth was a town girl. Daughter of the banker in Willow Creek. Never quite took to ranch life, but she tried. We were going to build a bigger house once the baby came. Eleanor could see it then, the scale of the dining table, the extra bedrooms upstairs, the careful planning for a family that never materialized. And you never considered remarrying? She asked gently. Wade's shoulders stiffened. No, once was enough. The words hung heavy in the air between them. Eleanor picked up her sewing again, keenly aware she had touched a tender spot. Doctor Miller rode out yesterday while you were sleeping, Wade said after a moment, changing the subject. He seems pleased with your progress, said the wound is healing cleanly. Yes, the headaches are less frequent now. I'm grateful for his care and yours. Eleanor tied off a neat stitch. Have you heard anything more about the men who attacked me? Or about Mr. Blackwell? Wade turned from the window, his expression darkening. Sheriff Patterson sent telegrams, but there's been no sign of Ned and Clancy. As for Blackwell, he paused. He returned to town yesterday. Eleanor's fingers stilled. Oh, Sheriff confronted him about your arrival. Blackwell claims there must have been a misunderstanding, says he never sent for a bride. The words struck Eleanor like a physical blow. That's a lie, she whispered. I have his letters, at least I did before. She gestured helplessly, referring to the robbery. I believe you, Wade said firmly. Blackwell's story doesn't hold water. Sheriff thinks he might have worked with Ned and Clancy somehow. Set you up to be robbed, split the take. Eleanor felt sick. But why go to such elaborate lengths? The letters went on for months. Some men will do anything for money, Wade said grimly. And you mentioned you sold everything to come here. Must have been a tidy sum. My parents' house, their belongings, my savings from 5 years of work, Eleanor confirmed, blinking back tears of anger. Nearly $2,000. Wade gave a low whistle. That would be motivation enough. Sheriff's keeping an eye on Blackwell, but without proof. I understand, Eleanor said, though the injustice of it burned. So he simply goes free while I am left with nothing. Not nothing, Wade corrected quietly. You have a place here until you decide what's next. Eleanor looked up at him gratefully. You've already done far more than could be expected, Mr. Harrington. Wade, he said suddenly. If you're going to be staying a while, you might as well use my given name. A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. Wade, then, and you must call me Eleanor. Something shifted in the air between them, a formality dropped, a distance shortened. Wade nodded once, then seemed at a loss for words. Mrs. Whittaker's timely appearance broke the moment. Lunch is ready if you're hungry. Nothing fancy, just cold ham and fresh bread. That sounds wonderful, Eleanor said, carefully setting aside the mending. I find I have quite an appetite today. As they moved to the dining room, Eleanor was conscious of Wade's presence behind her, solid, reassuring, unexpected. For all the trauma of the past week, she couldn't help feeling that perhaps fate had intervened in her disastrous journey west, steering her not to the man she had traveled to meet, but to the one who had lifted her, bleeding, from the dust of the road. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor's strength returned steadily. The bandage around her head was replaced by a smaller dressing, and eventually nothing at all as the wound healed to a thin pink line hidden by her hair. Dr. Miller pronounced her recovered, though he cautioned against overexertion. Eleanor settled into the rhythm of the ranch. She took over mending for the entire bunkhouse, saving Mrs. Whittaker considerable work. She learned to bake bread in the kitchen's temperamental oven, gather eggs without startling the hens, and even milk the placid old cow named Buttercup that provided for the household's needs. Each small accomplishment felt like a victory, a step toward usefulness, toward belonging. The borrowed dresses became less awkward as she altered them to fit, and Mrs. Whittaker taught her to manage her hair in the simpler styles favored in Wyoming rather than the elaborate arrangements of Boston. Wade remained reserved, but grew less distant as the days passed. He began joining Eleanor on the porch after supper, the two of them sitting in companionable silence as the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes he would point out features of the landscape or tell stories of the ranch's early days. Other times they simply sat, each lost in their own thoughts but somehow together in them. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor was hanging laundry in the yard when Wade approached, leading his chestnut mare. "Would you like to see more of the ranch?" he asked, an uncharacteristic hesitancy in his voice. "If you feel strong enough to ride, that is." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "I would love to, but I haven't been on a horse since I was a girl." "Penny here is gentle as they come," Wade assured her, patting the mare's neck. "And we'll take it slow." The prospect of leaving the immediate surroundings of the house was appealing after weeks of convalescence. "Yes," Eleanor decided. "I'd like that very much." Wade's face brightened. "I'll have one of the boys saddle her properly for you." "Meet me by the corral in 10 minutes." Eleanor hurried to finish hanging the laundry, then went inside to change into her sturdier boots. Mrs. Whittaker provided a shawl against the autumn chill, and soon Eleanor was making her way to the corral where Wade waited with 2 saddled horses. "I thought perhaps we'd ride up to the north pasture," he suggested, helping her mount. "The aspens are turning gold, and there's a view of the whole valley from the ridge." Eleanor settled into the saddle, feeling both nervous and exhilarated as Penny shifted beneath her. "Lead on, Wade. I trust your guidance." He swung easily onto his own horse, a tall black gelding, and they set off at a walk. Wade kept a close eye on Eleanor, but she found her childhood riding lessons returning to her as they followed a well-worn trail away from the buildings. The land opened before them, rolling hills covered in golden grass, stands of aspen with leaves shimmering like coins in the breeze, the distant peaks of mountains still holding last year's snow in their highest reaches. The vastness of it took Eleanor's breath away. "It's beautiful," she said as they paused atop a small rise. "So different from the cramped streets of Boston. Too open for some folks," Wade remarked. Elizabeth found it overwhelming at first, said it made her feel small and exposed. Eleanor considered this. "I can understand that. But there's something freeing about it too, as if all possibilities lie before you, waiting to be claimed." Wade looked at her with new interest. "That's exactly how I've always felt about it." They rode on, Wade pointing out landmarks and sharing stories. Here was where a mountain lion had taken 3 calves last spring. There was the creek that ran dry in summer but raged during the spring melt. Beyond that ridge lay the Jenkins place, where old Sam Jenkins lived alone with his dogs and came to town only twice a year for supplies. Eleanor listened, absorbing the geography of this new world, asking questions that seemed to please Wade with their practicality. By the time they reached the north pasture, she felt she had a map of the rocking H unfolding in her mind, not just its physical features but its history, its challenges, its beauty. They dismounted by a grove of aspens, their golden leaves creating a canopy that filtered the afternoon sun into dappled patterns on the ground. Wade spread a blanket he'd brought in his saddlebag, and they sat looking out over the valley, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance. "Thank you for this," Eleanor said, breathing deeply of the clear mountain air. "I didn't realize how much I needed to see beyond the yard." "I thought it might do you good," Wade replied. "And I—" He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I enjoy your company, Eleanor." The simple admission warmed her more than she expected. "As I enjoy yours." Wade looked down at his hands, work roughened and strong. "I've been thinking about your situation, what your plans might be now that you're recovered." Eleanor's heart beat faster. This was the conversation she had been both anticipating and dreading. "I've been considering my options." "Which are," she sighed, "limited in truth. I could try to find work in Willow Creek, but from what Mrs. Whitaker tells me, there are few opportunities for a single woman beyond domestic service or working at the saloon." Wade's expression darkened at the mention of the saloon. "That's no place for you." "I agree," Eleanor said quickly. "I could perhaps return east, but the journey is expensive and I have no money, no connections there anymore." "You could stay," Wade said, the words coming out in a rush. "At the ranch, I mean. Not as a guest, but employed." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "Employed as what?" Wade seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Whitaker isn't getting any younger. She manages the house well enough, but the cooking and cleaning for the bunkhouse, the garden, the chickens, it's becoming too much for her alone. You could help her, learn the running of the place." "You're offering me a position as housekeeper," Eleanor clarified, uncertain whether to feel relieved or disappointed. "Assistant housekeeper to start," Wade amended. "With room, board, and a small wage, it would give you time to save, to consider your future without pressure." It was a practical solution. Eleanor acknowledged a way to maintain her independence while securing her immediate needs. Yet something in Wade's careful phrasing, the way he avoided her eyes, suggested there might be more to the offer than practicality alone. "That's very generous," she said slowly. "And I would be glad to help Mrs. Whitaker. She's been so kind to me." "Then you'll stay?" Wade asked, looking up at last. Eleanor met his gaze, seeing hope and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Yes, I'll stay. Thank you for the opportunity." Relief washed over Wade's features. "Good, that's good." They sat in silence for a moment, the decision settling between them like a bridge newly built. "We should head back," Wade said eventually. "The light will be fading soon and Mrs. Whitaker will be expecting us for supper." As they rode home through the golden afternoon, Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The uncertainty that had haunted her since waking in Dr. Miller's office was not entirely gone, but it had retreated. She had a place now, a purpose, and time to discover what might develop between her and the quiet rancher who had rescued her from the roadside and, perhaps, from a far worse fate than she had initially realized. Winter came early to Wyoming that year. The first snowfall arrived in mid-November, blanketing the rocking H in pristine white. By December, the routine of ranch life had adapted to the season. Cattle moved to sheltered pastures, extra feed stored in the barns, repairs to buildings completed before the worst weather set in. Eleanor had settled into her role as Mrs. Whitaker's assistant, learning the intricacies of managing a ranch household through the older woman's patient instruction. She had her own small room off the kitchen now, modest but private, with a window that looked toward the mountains. Her wages, though modest, accumulated in a tin box beneath her bed, security against an uncertain future. The work was demanding but satisfying. Eleanor discovered she had a talent for organization that complemented Mrs. Whitaker's cooking skills. Between them, they kept the main house immaculate, the the bunkhouse tolerably clean, and all 20 ranch hands well fed. Eleanor's mending skills became legendary among the cowboys, who now brought her their torn clothing with almost reverent gratitude. As winter deepened, the household drew closer together. Evenings were spent in the main room, where a fire roared against the bitter cold outside. Mrs. Whittaker knitted constantly, producing socks and scarves at an astonishing rate. Wade often read aloud from one of his books, Shakespeare, Dickens, or sometimes the newspaper from Cheyenne that arrived weeks late, but provided welcome connection to the outside world. Eleanor usually sewed during these readings, but she found herself watching Wade more often than her needle. The firelight cast his features in sharp relief, the strong line of his jaw, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes when something amused him, the way his voice deepened when he read dialogue. She had grown to appreciate his quiet strength, his unwavering fairness with his men, his unexpected gentleness with injured animals. For his part, Wade seemed more at ease in Eleanor's presence than he had been during her first days at the ranch. He sought her opinion on matters beyond the household, the quality of hay to purchase for winter feed, whether to expand the chicken coop come spring, which of 2 bulls would better improve his herd. Eleanor offered her thoughts carefully, always aware of her limited experience with ranch matters, but flattered by his evident respect for her practical mind. 2 days before Christmas, a blizzard descended on the rocking H. Wind howled around the eaves of the house, snow piled against the windows, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in buckets indoors. Wade and 3 of his most experienced hands were caught out checking the furthest pasture when the storm hit. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, straining to see through the whiteout conditions, her heart tight with worry. "They know what they're doing," Mrs. Whittaker assured her, though her own eyes kept drifting to the window. "Mr. Harrington won't take foolish risks." "But in this cold," Eleanor began, then stopped as shapes emerged from the swirling white. 4 riders, hunched against the wind, made their way slowly toward the barn. "There they are," Mrs. Whittaker said, relief evident in her voice. "Put the soup on, girl. They'll be half frozen." Eleanor hastened to obey, stoking the fire and hanging the large iron pot over the flames. She added extra potatoes and carrots to the beef broth, knowing the men would need substantial food after battling the elements. Nearly an hour passed before the kitchen door finally opened, admitting a blast of cold air and 4 snow-covered figures. The ranch hands stomped and shivered, accepting mugs of hot coffee with gratitude before heading to the bunkhouse to change. Wade lingered, his face reddened by wind, snowflakes melting in his hair and beard. "You must be freezing," Eleanor said, taking his coat and hanging it by the fire. "Sit down before you fall down." Wade obeyed without protest, a sign of his exhaustion. "Lost track of time," he admitted. "Storm came in faster than we expected. Here." Eleanor placed a steaming mug of coffee in his hands, her fingers brushing his. "Drink this while I fetch dry clothes." She hurried upstairs to Wade's room, selecting warm flannel from his dresser with a familiarity that would have scandalized Boston society, but seemed natural after months of laundering his belongings. When she returned, he had removed his boots but sat slumped in the chair, eyes closed in fatigue. "Wade," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder, "you need to change before you catch your death." His eyes opened, focusing on her face with effort. "You're fussing, Eleanor." "Someone ought to," she replied firmly. "Now, can you manage these yourself, or do you need help?" A hint of his usual wry humor returned. "I think I can still dress myself, thank you kindly." "Then do so while I dish up your soup. And don't even think of going back out tonight. Whatever needs doing can wait until morning." Wade raised an eyebrow at her authoritative tone but took the dry clothes and retreated to change. When he returned, color had begun to return to his face, and he ate the soup Eleanor placed before him with evident appreciation. "The cattle, Mrs. Whitaker asked, joining them at the table with her own bowl. "Moved them to the shelter of the South Canyon," Wade replied between spoonfuls. "They'll be all right there until the storm passes. Lost 2 calves to the cold before we could get them all rounded up." Eleanor's hand covered his briefly on the tabletop. "I'm sorry, that's hard." Wade turned his palm up, catching her fingers in his for just a moment before releasing them. "It's ranching. We save what we can." That night after Mrs. Whitaker had retired and Wade had finally gone upstairs to his well-earned rest, Eleanor sat alone by the dying fire. The wind still moaned around the house, but inside all was warm and secure. She thought of how differently this Christmas might have gone, had Thomas Blackwell been the man his letters portrayed, or had Wade not found her on that dusty road in September. She would have been someone's wife by now, for better or worse. Instead, she was. What? Not quite servant, not quite family. A woman in between states, like the territory itself, not quite wild, not quite settled. And Wade, what was she to him? Employer and employee, certainly. Friends, perhaps. But there were moments a glance held too long. A hand offered to help her down from a wagon. The way he listened when she spoke, as if her words mattered deeply, that suggested the possibility of more. Eleanor sighed, banking the fire for the night. Such thoughts were pointless speculation. Wade had made his position clear that day on the porch once was enough for him where marriage was concerned. Whatever grew between them would remain unspoken, a current running beneath the surface of their daily interactions. Yet as she made her way to her small room off the kitchen, Eleanor couldn't help wondering what might have been and what might yet be if circumstances were different. Christmas arrived with clear, cold brilliance. The blizzard had passed, leaving the ranch transformed into a glistening wonderland. Eleanor rose early to help Mrs. Whitaker prepare the special breakfast that had become tradition at the Rocking H sourdough pancakes with preserved summer berries, thick cut bacon, and eggs from the hardy hens that continued laying despite the cold. The bunkhouse emptied as the hands, wearing their cleanest shirts and freshly shaved, made their way to the main house for the holiday meal. Eleanor had come to know each of them over the past months, from grizzled Hank, who had been with Wade since the beginning, to young Jimmy, barely 16 and experiencing his first winter on the range. Wade presided at the head of the table, his usual reserve softening into genuine warmth as he thanked his men for another year of loyal service. Mrs. Whitaker beamed as compliments on the food flowed freely, and Eleanor felt a swell of pride at being part of creating this moment of celebration amid the harsh realities of ranch life. After breakfast, small gifts were exchanged, practical items mostly, like new gloves or pocket knives, but given and received with evident pleasure. Eleanor had used some of her wages to purchase tobacco for the men who smoked and peppermint sticks for those who didn't. She had also knitted scarves under Mrs. Whitaker's tutelage, simple but warm, one for each man. "This is mighty fine work, Miss Eleanor," Hank said, wrapping his dark green scarf around his weathered neck. "Ain't had nothing handmade since my mama passed." Eleanor smiled, touched by his gruff gratitude. "You're very welcome, Hank. I hope it keeps you warm on watch." When the men had departed for their afternoon of leisure, a rare treat in the ranching calendar, Eleanor began clearing the table. Wade appeared at her elbow, taking a stack of plates from her hands. "Leave those for now," he said quietly. "I have something for you." Curious, Eleanor followed him into the sitting room where a small package wrapped in brown paper sat on the side table. Wade handed it to her, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his manner. "It's not much," he said as she carefully unwrapped it. Inside lay a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson, its cover embossed with delicate flowers. Eleanor opened it reverently, running her fingers over the fine paper. "Oh, Wade," she breathed, "it's beautiful." "I noticed you reading my Shakespeare," he explained. "Thought you might like poetry of your own." The thoughtfulness of the gift, not clothing or something practical, but nourishment for her mind, moved Eleanor deeply. "I love it, thank you." Wade shifted, then reached into his pocket. "There's something else. Something that belonged to Elizabeth. I've been thinking she would want you to have it." He extended his hand, opening his palm to reveal a small brooch, a silver filigree design set with a single pearl. Simple, elegant, clearly cherished. Eleanor stared at it, understanding the significance of such a gesture. "Wade, I couldn't possibly, please," he said softly. "It's been sitting in a drawer for 3 years. It should be worn, appreciated." Their eyes met, and in his Eleanor saw not grief but resolution, a conscious step away from the past. With trembling fingers, she took the brooch, pinning it carefully to her collar. "Thank you," she said again, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. "I have something for you as well, though it seems humble in comparison." She retrieved a package from beneath the small tree that decorated the corner of the room. Wade unwrapped it to find a hand-sewn vest of dark blue wool, lined with soft flannel. "I noticed your old one was wearing thin," Eleanor explained. "Mrs. Whittaker helped with the pattern, but I did all the stitching myself." Wade ran his hand over the neat seams, the carefully worked buttonholes. "No one has made clothing for me since I was a boy," he said, voice rough with emotion. "This is far from humble, Eleanor. It's a gift of time and care." He removed his old vest and put on the new one, the fit perfect across his broad shoulders. The color brought out the blue in his eyes, making them appear more vivid against his sun-browned skin. "How does it look?" he asked, standing straighter for her inspection. "Very handsome," Eleanor replied honestly, a flush rising to her cheeks at her own boldness. Something shifted in Wade's expression, a softening, a decision being made. "Eleanor," he began, taking a step toward her. "These past months, Mrs. Whittaker's voice from the kitchen interrupted whatever he had been about to say. "Mr. Harrington, there's a rider coming fast from town." The moment shattered as Wade moved swiftly to the window. "It's Doc Miller," he said, his tone changing from intimate to concerned in an instant. Something must be wrong. He strode to the door, opening it just as the doctor reined his horse to a stop in the yard. Dr. Miller's face was grim beneath his snow-dusted hat. "Wade," he called, dismounting stiffly. "There's been a fire in town. The Jenkins place. Old Sam's in a bad way and I need help getting him to town. Thought you might spare a wagon and a couple of hands." Wade was already reaching for his coat. "Of course. Come in while I get things organized. Eleanor, can you fix the doc something hot to drink?" Just like that, the peaceful Christmas afternoon transformed into urgent activity. Eleanor busied herself with coffee and food for Dr. Miller while Wade assembled a team to accompany him back to the Jenkins homestead. Within half an hour they were gone. Wade, Hank, and 2 other experienced hands, along with the doctor and the wagon fitted with blankets and straw for transporting the injured man. "They might be gone all night, Mrs. Whittaker said as she and Eleanor watched the wagon disappear down the snow-packed road. "Poor old Sam, living out there alone all these years and now this." "Will he survive?" Eleanor asked. Mrs. Whittaker shook her head doubtfully. "Hard to say." Doc didn't look hopeful. "Burns are terrible things, especially for a man Sam's age." The remainder of Christmas Day passed quietly. Eleanor read from her new book of poetry, finding solace in Dickinson's precise observations of nature and emotion. Mrs. Whittaker dozed by the fire, her knitting forgotten in her lap. The ranch hands kept to the bunkhouse, the festive mood of the morning dampened by concern for their employer and the injured homesteader. It was past midnight when Eleanor, unable to sleep, heard the sound of horses in the yard. She threw a shawl over her nightdress and hurried to the kitchen door, opening it to find Wade dismounting wearily in the moonlight. "How is Mr. Jenkins?" she asked as Wade stamped snow from his boots on the porch. "Gone," Wade replied heavily. "Passed on the way to town. Burns were too severe." Eleanor's hand went to her mouth. "Oh, Wade, I'm so sorry." He nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of his body as he stepped into the warmth of the kitchen. "We'll bury him day after tomorrow. Ground's too frozen to dig the grave tomorrow." Eleanor helped him remove his snow-crusted coat, noticing with concern how his hands trembled slightly. "You're freezing again. Sit down. I'll make you something hot." Wade sank into a chair, rubbing his face. "Just some coffee, if you don't mind, then I should sleep. It's been a long day." Eleanor busied herself at the stove, heating water and grinding coffee beans as quietly as possible to avoid waking Mrs. Whittaker. When she placed the steaming mug before Wade, he caught her wrist gently. "Thank you," he said, his eyes meeting hers in the dim lamplight. "Not just for the coffee." "For everything." Eleanor covered his hand with her free one. "You don't need to thank me, Wade. I'm glad to be here." His thumb traced small circles on the inside of her wrist, sending shivers up her arm that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'm glad you're here too," he said softly. "More than I can properly express." The confession hung between them, fragile and significant. Eleanor felt her heart beating faster, aware of the impropriety of their situation alone in the kitchen at night, she in her nightclothes, his hand still holding hers. Yet she couldn't bring herself to move away. "Wade," she began, uncertain what she meant to say but needing to speak. He released her wrist suddenly, as if coming to his senses. "I should let you get back to sleep. I'm not thinking clearly tonight." The moment passed, leaving Eleanor with a curious mixture of disappointment and relief. "Of course, you need rest too." Wade stood, taking his coffee. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night," she replied, watching as he made his way toward the stairs, his shoulders squared against the weight of the day's events. Alone in the kitchen, Eleanor pressed her hand to the place where his fingers had touched her skin, still warm from his touch. Whatever had almost happened between them on Christmas morning and again, just now remained unfinished, a sentence begun but not completed. Yet she sensed that something had shifted, a door cracked open that had previously been firmly shut. Whether either of them would be brave enough to step through remained to be seen. The new year arrived with a bitter cold snap that kept everyone close to home. January passed in a blur of routine tasks and early nightfall, the household conserving lamp oil and focusing on essential work. February brought more snow, and the beginning of calving season a critical time for the ranch's future prosperity. Wade was often absent from the house, spending long hours in the barn with expectant heifers or checking on new calves in the sheltered pastures. When he did appear for meals, he was usually too exhausted for conversation, eating quickly before returning to his duties or falling into bed for a few hours' sleep before the next round of checks. Eleanor missed their evening talks and the quiet moments of connection they had begun to share. She understood the demands of the season but felt his absence keenly. The Christmas brooch remained pinned to her collar each day, a small connection to him even when he wasn't present. One brutally cold night in late February, Eleanor was awakened by the sound of the kitchen door opening. Grabbing her shawl, she ventured out to find Wade stomping snow from his boots, his face haggard in the dim light of the banked stove. "Another difficult birth?" she asked softly, moving to add wood to the fire. Wade nodded, sinking onto the bench by the door to remove his boots. "Twin calves. Lost one, but the other's strong. Heifer's doing all right, too." Eleanor filled the kettle, setting it to heat. "You look frozen through. Let me make you some tea with honey." "I wouldn't say no to something stronger if we had it," Wade admitted, rubbing his hands together to restore circulation. Eleanor hesitated, then reached high into a cupboard where she knew Mrs. Whittaker kept a bottle of whiskey for medicinal purposes. "Just a small amount," she said, pouring a finger's width into a mug before adding hot water and honey. "To warm you properly." Wade's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he accepted the steaming mug with gratitude. "You're full of surprises, Miss Vaughn." "A woman must be practical in frontier life," Eleanor replied with a small smile, sitting across from him at the table. "Even one raised in Boston drawing rooms." Wade took a long sip, color gradually returning to his wind-chapped face. "You've adapted better than most I've seen come west." "I had little choice," Eleanor pointed out. "But I've found I prefer the honesty of life here. In Boston, everything was about appearances, social standing. Here, what matters is whether you work hard, keep your word. And do you miss it? The city, I mean." Eleanor considered the question seriously. "I miss certain conveniences. Books, music. Being able to purchase fabric without waiting for the spring supply wagon, but the life itself." "No, I don't miss that at all," Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Elizabeth never stopped missing town life. The sociability of it, I think. She found the ranch isolating." It was the most he had spoken of his late wife since Christmas, and Eleanor treaded carefully. "It can be isolating. But there's community, too, of a different sort. The way everyone came together for Mr. Jenkins' funeral, how the neighboring ranches help each other during difficult times." "Yes," Wade agreed, "though I've never been one for socializing much myself." "I've noticed," Eleanor said dryly, earning a rare chuckle from him. "Are you saying I'm unsociable, Miss Vaughn? Reserved, perhaps, selective in your company?" Wade studied her over the rim of his mug. "Not all company is worth the effort. And is mine?" Eleanor asked, the late hour and the intimacy of the kitchen emboldening her. Wade's expression softened. "Yours is no effort at all. That's the surprising thing." The simple admission warmed Eleanor more than any fire could have. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the stove and the distant howl of the wind outside. "I should let you get back to sleep," Wade said eventually, setting down his empty mug. "Dawn comes early, and there'll be more calves needing attention." "Promise me you'll rest too," Eleanor said, rising to take his mug. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." "Yes, madam," Wade replied with mock solemnity, though his eyes were warm. "I promise." As he stood to go, he paused beside her, reaching out to touch the brooch at her collar. "You wear it every day." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed softly. "It reminds me that even precious things can have a second life, a new purpose." Wade's eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them. Then gently, he bent and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture so tender and unexpected that Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "Good night, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Good night, Wade," she managed to reply as he turned and left the kitchen, his footsteps soft on the stairs. Eleanor remained standing by the table, her hand rising to touch the spot where his lips had been. It was not a passionate embrace or a declaration of love, yet somehow it felt more significant than either might have been. A beginning, perhaps, a promise of possibility. With that thought warming her heart, Eleanor returned to her small room. sleep coming easier despite the howling wind and bitter cold outside. March brought the first hints of spring to Wyoming. Longer days, patches of bare ground appearing through the melting snow, birds returning from their winter migrations. The worst of calving season passed, leaving Wade with more regular hours and a healthier complexion than he had shown in weeks. Eleanor found herself watching him more often, noting small changes in his behavior toward her. He sought her company deliberately now, asking her to walk with him to check the kitchen garden for signs of life, or inviting her opinion on which fields should be planted first when the ground thawed enough for plowing. These moments together were still circumspect, often with Mrs. Whitaker nearby or in full view of the ranch hands. But there was an undercurrent of growing connection that Eleanor couldn't deny, nor did she wish to. She had come to Wyoming seeking a husband, and found instead an unexpected path to love, slower and more certain than the hasty arrangement she had originally pursued. In early April, the supply wagon made its first trip of the year from Willow Creek. Along with seeds, tools, and staples came a letter for Eleanor, the first communication she had received since arriving in Wyoming. The unfamiliar handwriting on the envelope gave her pause, but the Boston postmark stirred curiosity and a touch of apprehension. She opened it that evening in the privacy of her room, unfolding the single sheet of paper to find a brief message from Mrs. Pembroke, owner of the dress shop where Eleanor had worked. "Dear Miss Vaughn," it read, "I hope this finds you well in your new circumstances. I write with news that might interest you. Your former customer, Mrs. Astor, has been inquiring about your whereabouts. It seems her daughter's wedding gown, which you were to complete, has been finished by another with far less skill. She offers a considerable sum for your return to Boston to create a trousseau for her younger daughter, who marries in June. If this opportunity interests you, please telegraph your response to the address below. Passage would be arranged. Yours sincerely, Margaret Pembroke." Eleanor sat motionless, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. Here was an opportunity she had never expected, a chance to return to Boston with her reputation as a skilled seamstress intact, to earn good money practicing the trade she had trained for since girlhood. Mrs. Astor was a wealthy client. Her patronage would ensure Eleanor's financial security for years to come. Yet the thought of leaving the rocking of leaving Wade, created a physical ache in her chest. In 7 months, this place had become home in a way Boston never had. The people here, Mrs. Whitaker, the ranch hands, Dr. Miller, and above all, Wade had become her family, and Wade himself. What was growing between them remained largely unspoken, yet Eleanor knew with certainty that it was real and precious. Given time, it might blossom into the kind of deep, abiding love that sustained a lifetime together. But was that merely wishful thinking? Wade had never explicitly spoken of a future with her. The forehead kiss, the shared moments, the growing ease between them, these could be interpreted as friendship as easily as courtship. Perhaps she was reading too much into gestures that meant less to him than they did to her. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her small wooden box of keepsakes. She would not decide immediately. The round-trip telegraph to Boston and subsequent arrangements would take weeks at minimum. There was time to observe, to reflect, perhaps even to speak directly with Wade about what she meant to him, if she could find the courage. The following day brought unexpected activity to the ranch. As Eleanor helped Mrs. Whitaker prepare breakfast, a cloud of dust on the horizon heralded visitors unusual so early in the season. Wade, already in the yard preparing for the day's work, shaded his eyes to watch the approaching riders. Who could that be? Mrs. Whitaker wondered, peering through the kitchen window. Eleanor joined her, counting 5 horsemen moving at a steady pace toward the ranch buildings. Perhaps neighbors coming to discuss spring planting at this hour. With that many men, Mrs. Whittaker shook her head. Something's not right. Eleanor felt a flicker of unease as Wade strode to meet the riders, his posture alert but not yet alarmed. From the bunkhouse, several ranch hands emerged, sensing the unusual arrival. As the riders drew closer, Eleanor could make out details well-dressed men on quality horses, not the working cowboys of neighboring ranches. The leader, a portly man with a thick mustache, dismounted first, extending his hand to Wade in what appeared to be a cordial greeting. "Who is that?" Eleanor asked Mrs. Whittaker. The older woman squinted. "Looks like Albert Peterson from the bank in Willow Creek, and that's Judge Hollister with him. Can't make out the others." Eleanor's unease deepened. Bankers and judges did not typically make social calls to remote ranches, especially not at daybreak in early spring. She watched as Wade's expression changed from polite inquiry to concern, his shoulders stiffening as the portly man continued speaking and gesturing toward the pastures. After several minutes of conversation, Wade nodded curtly and led the men toward the house. Mrs. Whittaker hurriedly straightened her apron, and Eleanor moved to put on more coffee, sensing they would soon have guests at the table. The kitchen door opened, admitting Wade and the 5 visitors. Up close, the men looked even more out of place in the ranch kitchen city clothes, clean-shaven faces, hands uncalloused by physical labor. "Mrs. Whittaker, Miss Vaughn," Wade said formally, "these gentlemen have business with me. Could you prepare coffee for our guests while we talk in the study?" "Of course, Mr. Harrington," Mrs. Whittaker replied, matching his suddenly formal tone. "We'll bring it directly." As the men filed toward Wade's small study at the front of the house, Eleanor caught his eye, silently questioning. Wade gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, "Not now," before following his visitors. Mrs. Whittaker and Eleanor exchanged worried glances as they prepared a tray of coffee and the freshly baked biscuits intended for breakfast. "Something's wrong," Mrs. Whittaker murmured. "I haven't seen Mr. Harrington look that troubled since the drought 2 summers ago." Eleanor nodded, arranging cups with hands that weren't quite steady. "Should I take this in, or would that be inappropriate?" "You take it," Mrs. Whittaker decided. "Your manners are better than mine for dealing with town folk, and you might hear what's about." Eleanor carried the tray to the study door, balancing it carefully as she knocked. Wade's voice bade her enter, and she stepped into a room thick with tension. The visitors sat in chairs arranged before Wade's desk, while Wade himself stood by the window, his back to the room. "Coffee, gentlemen," Eleanor announced, setting the tray on the desk. As she poured, she was acutely aware of the visitors' curious glances, their assessment of her position in the household. "Thank you, miss." The portly man, Mr. Peterson, if Mrs. Whittaker was correct, inquired. "Vaughn," Eleanor supplied, passing him a cup. "Eleanor Vaughn." "Miss Vaughn assists Mrs. Whittaker with household matters," Wade explained, turning from the window. His face was composed but pale beneath his tan. "Eleanor, these are Mr. Peterson from the Willow Creek Bank, Judge Hollister, Mr. Evans the county recorder, and Messrs. Simmons and Taylor, representing the railroad." Eleanor nodded politely to each man, her mind racing. The railroad had been a topic of speculation in the county for years, rumors of a new line connecting Cheyenne to points west, opening up markets for cattle and other goods. "But what did that have to do with the rocking H, Miss Vaughn?" Judge Hollister said, accepting his coffee with a nod. "You have a very pleasant home here." "Thank you, Your Honor, though I am merely an employee," Eleanor corrected gently. "The ranch belongs to Mr. Harrington." "For the moment," Mr. Simmons murmured, earning a sharp glance from Wade. Eleanor finished serving the coffee, then looked to Wade for guidance. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Harrington?" Wade's eyes met hers, and she was startled by the bleakness she saw there. "No, thank you, Miss Vaughn. Please close the door on your way out." Dismissed but deeply troubled, Eleanor returned to the kitchen where Mrs. Whittaker waited impatiently. "Well, what's it about?" "I'm not certain," Eleanor admitted, "but I believe it involves the railroad." One of the men made a comment about the ranch belonging to Wade for the moment. Mrs. Whittaker's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh no, it's the right-of-way dispute." "What dispute?" The older woman sank into a chair. "There was talk last fall about the railroad wanting to run track through the south section of Rocking H land. Mr. Harrington refused to sell its prime grazing land, and the railroad would cut the herd off from the creek." "Surely they can't force him to sell?" Eleanor asked, alarm growing. "They can if they get the county to declare eminent domain," Mrs. Whittaker said grimly. "Progress, they call it. Never mind that it could ruin a man's livelihood." The two women fell silent, the breakfast preparations forgotten as they contemplated the implications. If the railroad took the south pasture, the Rocking H would lose access to its best water source and a significant portion of its grazing land. The impact on the ranch's viability could be devastating. Nearly an hour passed before the study door opened and the visitors emerged. Wade showed them out with rigid courtesy, his expression unreadable as they mounted their horses and rode away. Eleanor and Mrs. Whittaker watched from the kitchen window as Wade stood in the yard long after the dust from the departing riders had settled, his gaze fixed on the distant southern pasture. When he finally returned to the house, his face was lined with worry. "Eleanor, Mrs. Whittaker," he acknowledged, pouring himself a cup of the now cold coffee. "I apologize for the disrupted morning." "What did they want, Wade?" Eleanor asked softly, formality forgotten in her concern. Wade took a long breath. "The railroad has filed for eminent domain on the south section 500 acres, including a mile of creek frontage. They're offering compensation, but it's well below the land's worth, and it doesn't account for the impact on the rest of the ranch." "Can you fight it?" Mrs. Whittaker asked. "I intend to," Wade said grimly. "I've got 2 weeks to file a formal objection with the territorial court. Judge Hollister claims it's just a formality that the railroad will get the land regardless, but I won't give up without a fight." Eleanor moved to stand beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "What can we do to help?" Wade covered her hand with his own, a gesture of both gratitude and despair. "Pray, I suppose, and prepare for hard times ahead. Even if by some miracle I keep the land, the legal fees alone will be a burden." "We'll manage," Mrs. Whittaker declared stoutly. "This ranch has weathered drought, blizzards, and cow fever. It will survive the railroad too." Wade attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your confidence is appreciated, Mrs. Whittaker. Now I need to speak with the hands. They should know what we're facing." As he strode toward the bunkhouse, Eleanor felt a cold certainty settle in her heart. The letter from Boston, tucked away in her keepsake box, now represented more than a personal choice between past and future. It offered a means to help the man she had come to love, even if that meant leaving him. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Wade made multiple trips to Willow Creek, and even traveled to Cheyenne to consult with a lawyer who specialized in land disputes. Eleanor kept the household running smoothly in his absence, ensuring that ranch operations continued with minimal disruption despite the growing anxiety among the hands. Each time Wade returned, he looked more worn, more discouraged. The lawyer in Cheyenne had confirmed Judge Hollister's assessment fighting the railroad was likely futile. The territorial government was eager for development, and eminent domain cases were almost invariably decided in favor of progress. "The best I can hope for is a fairer price," Wade admitted one evening as he and Eleanor sat on the porch after supper. "But even that's uncertain. The lawyer's fees are already eating into our reserves." Eleanor gazed out at the ranch spread before them, golden in the evening light. "What will it mean for the ranch if you lose that land?" Wade sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through his hair. "We'll have to reduce the herd by at least a third. Find alternative water sources for the remaining cattle, which means digging wells, expensive ones. The profit margin will be thin for years if there's any profit at all. But you could survive. Keep the ranch, maybe, if we're careful, if the weather cooperates, if cattle prices don't drop." Wade's voice was heavy with the weight of too many ifs. "I've built something here, Eleanor. To watch it be diminished this way." Eleanor's heart ached for him. She had come to understand how deeply Wade's identity was tied to this land, to the ranch he had created through years of backbreaking work and careful planning. The threat to that legacy was a threat to the man himself. "You'll find a way," she said softly, wishing she felt as confident as she tried to sound. "You're too stubborn to fail." Wade's mouth quirked in a ghost of a smile. "Stubborn am I, determined," Eleanor amended, returning his almost smile. "Resilient. It's why the ranch has prospered under your care." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as twilight deepened over the land. Eleanor was acutely aware of Wade beside her, of the scant inches separating them on the porch bench, of all the words that remained unspoken between them despite the growing closeness of recent months. "I received a letter," she said suddenly, the decision crystallizing in her mind. "From Boston. A former client is offering to pay my way back east for a commission, a wedding trousseau." Wade turned to her, surprise evident in his face. "When did this arrive?" "With the last supply wagon. I've been considering it." "I see." Wade's expression shuddered, becoming unreadable in the fading light. "It would be a good opportunity for you. Better pay than what I can offer here." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, steeling herself for what she needed to say next. "The commission fee would be substantial. If I accepted, I could help with the legal expenses, or securing new water rights if it comes to that." Wade stiffened beside her. "You're offering me money. I'm offering to help," Eleanor clarified, hearing the defensiveness in his tone. "This ranch has become my home too, Wade. I care what happens to it." "To everyone here, including me?" he asked quietly. "Especially you," Eleanor admitted, her heart pounding. Wade stood abruptly, moving to the porch railing, his back to her. "I won't take your money, Eleanor, and I won't be the reason you return to a city you left behind." "It would only be temporary," she protested. "Just long enough to complete the commission and return. And if I've lost the water rights by then, if half the hands have moved on to more stable employment, if the ranch you return to is a shadow of what it was." Wade's voice was taut with suppressed emotion. "I won't have you sacrifice your future for a losing battle." Eleanor rose, moving to stand beside him at the railing. "Shouldn't that be my choice to make?" Wade turned to her then, his face stark in the last light of day. "You came west for a new beginning, not to tie yourself to a failing ranch and a man with an uncertain future." "I came west for a marriage of convenience with a stranger," Eleanor corrected him. "Instead, I found a home, a purpose," and she faltered, then gathered her courage. "And feelings I never expected to have again after my parents died. Feelings for you, Wade." The admission hung between them, impossible to take back. Wade's expression softened, vulnerability replacing the defensive pride of moments before. "Eleanor," he said, her name almost a caress. "I have no right to ask anything of you, not now with everything so uncertain." "You haven't asked," she pointed out. "I'm offering." My help, my support, my— She stopped just short of saying love, uncertain if they were ready for that declaration. Wade took her hands in his calloused fingers warm against her skin. I can't let you sacrifice an opportunity for financial security, not when I might have little to offer in return. I'm not asking for guarantees, Eleanor said quietly. Just the chance to help someone I care about deeply. Wade's eyes searched hers, conflict evident in his gaze. Then, with deliberate gentleness, he released her hands. I need time to think, Eleanor, about the ranch, about us, about what's fair to ask of you. Eleanor nodded, understanding his need for space even as disappointment tightened her throat. Of course. As Wade turned to go inside, she called after him softly, Wade, whatever you decide about my offer, about us, know that I don't regret a single moment since you found me on that road. He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight from within. Nor do I, Eleanor. That's what makes this so damned difficult. Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone on the darkening porch with the weight of unresolved questions pressing on her heart. The territorial court hearing was scheduled for the 3rd week of April in Cheyenne. Wade departed 2 days early, planning to meet with his lawyer for final preparations. He left the ranch in Hank's capable hands, with instructions for regular reports on the new calves and the spring planting. His goodbye to Eleanor had been formal, almost distant, a marked contrast to the emotional conversation on the porch the week before. She had risen at dawn to see him off, pressing a package of food for the journey into his hands. Good luck, she'd said simply, not knowing what else to offer. Wade had nodded, hesitating as if there were more he wanted to say. In the end, he had merely touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before mounting his horse and riding away. Now, 3 days later, Eleanor moved through her duties mechanically, her mind constantly wandering to Cheyenne and the hearing that would determine the ranch's future. Mrs. Whitaker watched her with sympathetic eyes, but said little, understanding that Eleanor's distraction stemmed from more than concern for the ranch's financial prospects. On the evening of the hearing, Eleanor sat by the window in her small room, unable to concentrate on the book of poetry Wade had given her for Christmas. She had worn Elizabeth's brooch every day since his departure, a talisman of hope and connection to the man who had become the center of her world. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. Yes, Mrs. Whitaker entered, her round face creased with worry. A telegram just arrived from Cheyenne, brought by young Jimmy, who was in town for supplies. Eleanor's heart lurched. From Wade. What does it say? Mrs. Whitaker handed her the small envelope. I thought you should read it yourself. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened the telegram, unfolding the single sheet within. Court ruled for railroad stop land transfer effective immediately. Stop returning tomorrow. Stop. Wade, the terse message, told her everything and nothing. The rocking H had lost its battle. The south pasture would go to the railroad, taking with it the precious water rights and the ranch's most fertile grazing land. But what of Wade himself? How deeply had the defeat affected him? And what did it mean for their future if indeed they had one? Oh, Mrs. Whitaker, Eleanor said softly. He must be devastated. The older woman nodded, sitting heavily on the edge of Eleanor's bed. Mr. Harrington put everything he had into this place, his heart and soul, not just his money, to lose even a part of it this way. What will happen now? Hard times ahead, Mrs. Whitaker said frankly. We'll have to tighten our belts, work harder with less. Some of the hands might need to be let go if we can't maintain the full herd. Eleanor looked down at the telegram again, reading between the sparse lines to the pain and disappointment Wade must be feeling. I should accept the commission in Boston, she said suddenly, decision crystallizing. The money would help and run away just when he needs you most. Mrs. Whittaker interrupted, her tone uncharacteristically sharp. Is that truly what you want to do, Eleanor? Of course not. But if I can help financially, that man doesn't need your money, Mrs. Whittaker said firmly. He needs your faith in him, your presence, your heart. Eleanor stared at the older woman, taken aback by her directness. But he's never said we've never spoken of. For a smart woman, you can be remarkably blind, Mrs. Whittaker observed dryly. That man has been falling in love with you since the day he carried you, bleeding, into town. And unless I'm much mistaken, you've been falling right back. Heat rushed to Eleanor's cheeks. Is it that obvious? To everyone but the two of you, apparently. Mrs. Whittaker stood, smoothing her apron. Now, Mr. Harrington will be home tomorrow, likely in poor spirits and half convinced he's failed everyone who depends on him. The question is, what are you going to do about it? With that, she left Eleanor alone with her thoughts and the telegram that had changed everything. Wade returned to the rocking H as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. Eleanor, who had been watching from the kitchen window while helping prepare supper, felt her heart contract at the sight of him, shoulders slumped, hat pulled low, none of the straight-backed confidence that usually characterized his bearing. She dried her hands on her apron, fighting the urge to run out and meet him. Instead, she waited as he stabled his horse and spoke briefly with Hank, who had emerged from the bunkhouse at his arrival. Only when Wade turned toward the main house did Eleanor step onto the porch. "Welcome home," she said softly as he approached. Wade looked up, seeming to truly notice her for the first time. "Eleanor." He removed his hat, revealing hair disheveled from travel and eyes shadowed with fatigue and defeat. "You received my telegram." "Yes, I'm so sorry, Wade. I know how much you fought for the land." He nodded once, the simple acknowledgement more eloquent than any lengthy explanation of the court proceedings. "Is there coffee? I could use something hot after the ride." "Of course. Come inside." "In the kitchen, Mrs." Whittaker tactfully made herself scarce after setting a cup of coffee and a plate of fresh biscuits before Wade. Eleanor sat across from him, waiting as he took a long drink, closing his eyes briefly at the simple comfort of hot liquid after hours in the saddle. Was there no hope at all? She asked eventually. Wade set down his cup. "None. The decision was made before I even entered the courtroom. The railroad's lawyers had everything prepared: surveys, economic projections, testimonials about the benefits to the territory. My objections were heard and dismissed in less than an hour. And the compensation, fair market value for raw land, they called it. No consideration for the water rights, the impact on the rest of the ranch, or the cost of digging new wells." Wade's voice was flat with exhaustion and anger. "It's robbery wrapped in legal papers, but there's nothing more to be done." Eleanor reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry, Wade. I know what this ranch means to you." He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. "I've been thinking about your offer." "The commission in Boston." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Yes, you should take it," Wade said, his expression carefully controlled. "It's a good opportunity and there's nothing holding you here now." "Nothing," Eleanor repeated, withdrawing her hand slowly. "Is that truly what you believe?" Wade stood, moving to the window to look out at the ranch's diminished kingdom. "The rocking H is facing hard times, Eleanor. I'll be reducing the herd, letting go half the hands. There might not even be a position for you here in a few months." "I'm not concerned about my position," Eleanor said, rising to stand behind him. "I'm concerned about you, about us." Wade turned, his face a study in conflicted emotions. "There can't be an us, Eleanor, not now. I have nothing to offer a woman like you, a woman like me." Eleanor echoed, frustration rising. "And what kind of woman do you think I am, Wade Harrington? One who measures a man's worth by the size of his cattle herd, by how many acres he owns. A woman who deserves security, stability, Wade insisted. Things I can no longer guarantee. I never asked for guarantees, Eleanor reminded him, her voice rising slightly. I asked to help someone I care about. I offered to stand beside you through difficult times. And I can't accept that offer, Wade said firmly. Not out of pride, Eleanor, but out of care for you. You have a chance at a better life in Boston. I won't hold you back. Eleanor stared at him, anger and hurt warring in her chest. So you've decided for me then? Without even asking what I want, Eleanor. No, she interrupted, 7 months of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. You don't get to make this decision alone, Wade. You don't get to push me away for my own good without considering that perhaps, just perhaps, my good is tied to yours in ways that have nothing to do with land or money or cattle. Wade looked startled by her vehemence. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you, you impossible man, Eleanor exclaimed, the words she had held back for so long finally escaping. I love your determination, your integrity, your quiet strength. I love the way you care for your land and your people. I even love your stubborn pride, though at this moment I could throttle you for it. Wade stared at her, momentarily speechless. I didn't come to Wyoming looking for love, Eleanor continued, her voice softening. I came for security, for a practical arrangement. But then you found me on that road, bleeding and alone, and you lifted me up. You gave me shelter, purpose, a place to belong. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with the man who never asked for anything in return but offered everything I truly needed. She took a step closer to him, close enough to see the pulse beating rapidly in his throat. So don't tell me what I deserve or what's best for me. Don't push me away because you think you're protecting me. Ask me what I want, Wade. Just ask. Wade's composure cracked, vulnerability showing through the mask of noble sacrifice. What do you want, Eleanor? He asked hoarsely. You, she said simply. A life here with you, whatever that life may hold. Good seasons and bad, prosperity or struggle. I want to build something with you that can't be measured in acres or head of cattle. Wade reached for her then, his hands cupping her face with exquisite gentleness. I've been a fool, he whispered. Yes, Eleanor agreed, a smile breaking through her tears. But you're my fool if you want to be. I love you, Wade said, the words a revelation and a release. I think I've loved you since I carried you into town that day, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself. I told myself it was just concern, then friendship, then something I had no right to feel, but it's always been love. Eleanor's heart soared at the confession. Then stop fighting it. Stop fighting me. I'm afraid, Wade admitted, his forehead touching hers. Afraid of failing you, of not being the man you deserve. The only failure would be in not trying, Eleanor whispered. In letting fear keep us apart when we could face whatever comes together. Wade's answer was not in words but in the press of his lips against hers, tentative at first. Then with growing confidence as Eleanor responded, her arms winding around his neck to draw him closer. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and months of unspoken longing pouring into this first, perfect connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Wade kept his arms around her waist, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. Stay, he said simply. Not as my employee, not as a friend, but as my wife. If you'll have me with all my flaws and all the challenges ahead. Eleanor smiled up at him, joy bubbling through her veins like champagne. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it, the flaws, the challenges, and most of all to you. Wade kissed her again, sealing the promise between them. Outside the window, the sun set on the rocking H, smaller now in acreage, but somehow larger in possibility as two people who had found each other against all odds, committed to facing its uncertain future together. Wade and Eleanor were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Willow Creek. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by the ranch hands, neighbors, and friends from town. Eleanor wore a dress she had made herself from fabric ordered specially from Cheyenne, not the elaborate silk of Boston fashion, but a lovely blue cotton that matched her eyes and complemented the silver brooch that had once belonged to Elizabeth. Wade, standing tall and straight in his best suit, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such wonder and love that Eleanor felt her heart might burst from happiness. When they spoke their vows, his voice was clear and certain, all doubt and hesitation banished by the conviction of their shared choice. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared, and Wade kissed his bride amid cheers and applause from those who had witnessed their journey from strangers to partners. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch tables set up in the yard, food prepared by Mrs. Whitaker and the neighboring women, music provided by 2 ranch hands with fiddles and another with a harmonica. As twilight deepened, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Eleanor, taking a moment away from the festivities, found herself standing on the porch, looking out over the land that was now legally hers as well as Wade's. She felt his presence before she heard him, a warmth at her back that had become wonderfully familiar. "Happy, Mrs. Harrington?" Wade asked, his arms encircling her waist as he joined her in contemplation of their domain. "Extraordinarily so, Mr. Harrington," she replied, leaning back against his solid chest, "though I admit it's strange to hear myself called that." "You'll get used to it," he assured her, dropping a kiss on her upturned cheek. "We have a lifetime for you to practice." Eleanor smiled, turning in his embrace to face him. "A lifetime. I like the sound of that." Music drifted from the yard along with laughter and the murmur of conversation. Their guests were enjoying themselves, but soon they would depart, leaving the newlyweds to begin their life together in earnest. "Dance with me," Wade suggested, offering his hand with formal courtesy that made Eleanor laugh. "Here on the porch. Scandalous, Mr. Harrington." "I'm a scandalous man, Mrs. Harrington," he replied with mock seriousness. "Marrying my housekeeper, dancing on my own porch, who knows what I might do next?" Eleanor placed her hand in his, allowing him to draw her into a simple waltz. "I have a few suggestions if you're interested." Wade's eyes darkened at her teasing tone. "I'm very interested," he murmured, pulling her closer as they moved in time to the distant music. Later, after the last guest had departed and Mrs. Whitaker had tactfully retired to her room, Wade carried Eleanor across the threshold of the master bedroom, a room she had cleaned but never slept in, now transformed by fresh linens and wildflowers gathered from the hillside. "Welcome home," he said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "Home," Eleanor echoed, the word filled with meaning beyond the physical space they occupied. "It's been a long journey to find it." Wade's fingers traced the line of her jaw, his touch reverent. "Worth every step, though, wouldn't you say?" Eleanor's answer was in her kiss, in the way she pressed herself against him, in the trust with which she gave herself to this man who had lifted her, bleeding from the dust of a Wyoming road, and never truly let her go. That night, as they learned each other's bodies with tenderness and growing passion, Eleanor felt the last pieces of her heart's puzzle falling into place. This was where she belonged, not in Boston's drawing rooms or even in the rocking HTK's kitchen, but in the arms of a man whose quiet strength had become her sanctuary, and whose love had become her greatest treasure. Afterward, lying in the circle of Wade's embrace as moonlight filtered through the window, Eleanor traced lazy patterns on his chest, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she first set out for Wyoming as a mail-order bride. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, his voice drowsy with satisfaction. "I'm thinking about fate," Eleanor replied. "About how the worst day of my life led me to the best parts of it. If Thomas Blackwell had been the man he pretended to be in his letters, if those men hadn't robbed me and left me on the road. If I hadn't been riding into town that particular afternoon," Wade added, understanding her train of thought. "Exactly. So many chances for our paths never to cross, yet here we are." Wade's arms tightened around her. "I'm grateful for every circumstance that brought you to me, though I wish you hadn't had to suffer to get here." "It was worth it," Eleanor assured him, resting her cheek against his heart. "Every moment of fear and pain led to this. I wouldn't change a thing." As they drifted toward sleep, Eleanor found herself thinking of the letter still in her keepsake box, the offer from Boston that she had declined by telegraph the day after Wade's return from Cheyenne. Mrs. Pembroke had responded with surprise and a hint of disappointment, but Eleanor felt no regret. Her future lay here, with Wade facing whatever challenges the ranch might encounter. The Rocking H would survive. It might be smaller, might require new strategies and hard work to overcome the loss of the South pasture, but with Wade's determination and Eleanor's practical support, it would continue. Children would come, God willing, new life to fill the house that had been built for a family. The railroad would bring challenges but opportunities too: easier access to markets, new settlers, growth for the territory. Whatever the future held, Eleanor knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found her true place in the world, not as the mail-order bride she had set out to be, but as the chosen partner of a man who had lifted her from the dust of the road and into his heart. With that peaceful certainty, Eleanor Vaughn Harrington closed her eyes and slept in the arms of her husband, home at last. Epilogue: 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the yard of the Rocking H as Eleanor hung laundry in the summer sunshine. She paused, shielding her eyes to watch her 3-year-old son, William, chasing butterflies while his infant sister, Sarah, slept in a basket nearby under the watchful eye of Mrs. Whittaker. 5 years had brought many changes to the ranch. The railroad, as predicted, had taken the South pasture, but it had also brought new markets for Rocking H beef. Wade had adapted, digging 2 new wells and implementing more efficient grazing practices that made the most of their reduced acreage. The herd was smaller but of higher quality, commanding premium prices at market. The house had expanded to a new wing added to accommodate their growing family, with a proper sewing room where Eleanor created clothes for local customers, a small business that had flourished as Willow Creek grew with the coming of the railroad. Most precious of all were the children: William, with his father's wheat-colored hair and his mother's blue eyes, and baby Sarah, barely 6 months old, but already showing signs of her father's determined nature. They were the embodiment of the love that had grown between Wade and Eleanor, turning the ranch house into a true home filled with warmth and laughter. "Mama, Mama," William called, running toward her with something clasped carefully in his small hands. "Look what I found." Eleanor knelt to his level as he opened his palms to reveal a tiny frog, its green skin glistening in the sunlight. "That's wonderful, darling. But remember, living creatures belong in nature. We should put him back by the creek so he can find his family." William nodded solemnly. "Papa said the same thing about the baby rabbit I found yesterday." "Your papa is a wise man," Eleanor said, smiling. "Speaking of whom, he should be back from town soon. Shall we finish hanging these sheets and then prepare a surprise for him? Cookies?" William suggested hopefully, his eyes lighting up. "I think that could be arranged," Eleanor agreed, ruffling his hair as she stood. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of hoofbeats announced Wade's return. Eleanor watched as he rode into the yard, still as straight-backed and handsome as the day he had found her on the road to Willow Creek. "Papa," William shouted, abandoning his frog to run toward his father. Wade dismounted smoothly, scooping his son up into his arms. "There's my boy." "Have you been helping your mother today?" "I caught a frog," William reported proudly, "but I have to put him back so he can find his family." "That's right," Wade agreed, carrying William on his hip as he approached Eleanor. "And how are my favorite ladies today?" "We're well," Eleanor said, accepting his kiss with a smile. "Sarah's napping and we're nearly done with the laundry. Any news from town?" Wade set William down, urging him to go release his frog by the creek. Once the boy was out of earshot, his expression grew serious. "Thomas Blackwell is back." Eleanor stilled, the name from her past unexpected after so many years. "Back in Willow Creek. Why?" "Hard times, from what I gather. The business venture that took him to Cheyenne failed. He's looking for work at the mercantile again." Wade studied her face. "Does it trouble you to hear of him?" Eleanor considered the question honestly. Thomas Blackwell had once represented all her hopes for a new life in the West. His abandonment and possible complicity in her robbery had been a bitter betrayal. Yet without that betrayal, she would never have found Wade, never have built this life that exceeded her wildest dreams. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't trouble me. It's strange to think how significant he once seemed to my future when now he's just a footnote in our story." Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sheriff Patterson mentioned that Ned Harper was caught in Montana last year, hanged for murder. No sign of Clancy, though." "That chapter of our lives is truly closed then," Eleanor observed, "and I find I have no desire to revisit it." Wade's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him despite the public setting. "No regrets, Mrs. Harrington." "About how things turned out?" Eleanor looked up at him, this man who had rescued her, respected her, loved her through joy and hardship alike. She thought of their children, their home, the life they had built together against significant odds. "Not a single one, Mr. Harrington," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him properly. "Though I do occasionally wonder what might have happened if you hadn't been riding that particular road that September day." Wade smiled against her lips. "I was meant to find you," he said simply, "and I was meant to never let you go." As William came running back, eager to report on his frog's successful return to the creek, Eleanor felt the familiar surge of gratitude for this life she had found, not the one she had sought when she left Boston as a mail-order bride, but infinitely more precious for being unexpected, hard-won, and built on genuine love rather than practical arrangement. The bleeding woman on the road had found not just healing for her wounds but wholeness for her heart, lifted into the arms of a man who would never let her go, not through loss of land, not through winter storms, not through the challenges of building a life together in the wild Wyoming territory. And in that unbreakable embrace, Eleanor had found her true home,